Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our State of the Program series. Today, it's the Arkansas Razorbacks. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me, and Mike, John Calipari, and the Razorbacks. A very interesting season. They finished 28-9, 13-5 in the SEC, and a Sweet 16 loss to Arizona, who ended up going to the Final Four. But a lot to get into here with Arkansas, but what are some of your overarching thoughts on the Razorbacks this past season?
Look, I think Arkansas expected to have a little bit of a jump this year after last year. Calipari really had to piece together a roster in order to make his team successful, and he did a pretty good job. They ended up having a kind of a rough regular season, but were able to get to the Sweet 16. And this year, from a glance, it looks like, well, they kind of did the same thing in terms of they got to the Sweet 16, and you might not see a step up. But if you look at how they played in conference, it's a significant improvement from the year before. They were able to win the conference tournament championship in the SEC. That was big for their program. They certainly loaded up in the conference or in the out of conference schedule. They had some really tough opponents. They won a couple of those games. They lost some others, but they were able to get into conference play in a pretty good spot. Just one thing that was kind of similar to many John Calipari teams in the last several years is just not a good defensive team. Very bad on the defensive end. We saw that again this year, and we oftentimes saw where if they couldn't run up and down the floor, they were going to lose. And it didn't affect them as much in SEC play because in the SEC, a lot of teams are run and gun type programs. But when you looked at some of their losses in the out of conference, it clearly showed that they were missing something. But nevertheless, they get to the Sweet 16. It could have been a better year for them, but nobody expected them to beat Arizona. I know Arizona kind of got embarrassed in the Final Four, but um, Arizona was a really good team this year. And so their season ended in the Sweet 16 after beating Hawaii and High Point in the NCAA tournament.
They got to the same place that they did last year, Mike, but I think this year was like a big step up. Look, they got hot
Yes.
late last year and they got lucky with a favorable draw and matchup and they pulled off an upset. Like last year's 10 seed team was bad for 50 to 60% of the season. Then when Calipari went back to Rupp, they pulled that one off. They got some players back from injury, and then bang, Sweet 16. I think they did make a step this year. Like you said, they loaded the non-conference, and they did last year too, and they sort of lost all those games. This year it went a little better. It was a close loss at the Breslin Center. They played Duke on Thanksgiving on a neutral. They beat Louisville. They beat Texas Tech on a neutral. They played Houston in New Jersey on a neutral. So they get out of the non-conference at 10-3 with five like really high quality opponents. You go 2-3 in those. You definitely live with that. And then that set them up for a pretty, they didn't have to do like amazing in the SEC to get a good seed. They were 13-5. They certainly lost to they lost to Auburn by a bunch. They lost a bunch to a couple of these teams. They got smoked by Florida, but they also picked up a number of big victories too. But the name of the game here, Mike, is if you didn't watch a single Arkansas game this year, you just looked at this Torvik page right here. There's a whole lot of green in the offensive column and a whole lot of red in the defensive problem. In the defensive column, it was a little bit of a problem here, especially towards the second half of the season in SEC play. But fifth in offense, 63rd in defense. They pretty much fit that Calipari mold where when they could outscore you, but on days where they didn't have it, they're probably going to lose.
Yeah, there's that cliche that offense wins games and defense wins championships. But to a degree, that is true. I mean, you look at teams that made the Final Four and have won the national championship in the last several years, they're top 25 in offense and defensive
Yeah,
efficiency. The one
you need
exception
to
to
be good
that
at
was
both.
you need to be good at both. The
Yeah,
one exception to that was Illinois, actually this past year. And if you watch Illinois throughout the NCAA tournament, they were incredibly good on the defensive end,
yeah, they were
much
like
better than they
top.
were during the regular
They
season.
were they were still top 30 defensively, and they
Yeah.
were they had some really awful defensive games when a couple players were injured, and they had a bunch of good defensive games in the tournament. But I think like 27th or whatever Illinois ended up with, I'm not sure, versus
Yeah.
63rd. That is like very different.
Yeah.
And you see it here basically. All of the games where they weren't great offensively, they lost. And turns out for them, they were great a lot offensively, especially Darius Acuff, who was really fun to watch. But um, they didn't lose outside of the quad one. They only lost once outside of quad 1A. So they had a pretty good formula here for beating teams that they were better than. But when it came to teams that they weren't better than, 3-7 in quad 1A, it's pretty clear where they were in the grand scheme of things, and that the 15th to 20th best team in the country was probably a pretty accurate reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Arkansas, there's no doubt they could get up and down the floor and they could score in bunches. But you knew that with their defensive irregularities that there was a ceiling to this team. They could only go so far because you're not going to be able in this year, in this age of basketball, to just win by going up and down the floor.
In terms of their offense, obviously a lot of good numbers. Number one team at taking care of the ball. Just 12.2% of possessions were turnovers. Obviously, if you're not going to be good at defense, you shouldn't be giving them any extra possessions. That worked pretty well, but um, a couple of bad defensive stats here. They didn't turn over other teams much, just 242 in that. They didn't get a ton of offensive rebounds, and they weren't good at preventing them either. There's some more extra possessions. They were 286th at 2-point defense, 54.4%. If you look at the teams that smoked them, especially late in the year, you have got Florida, who has, and Arizona both scoring 109 and 111. I mean, that's pretty clearly their weakness, was defending the rim or the 2-point defense, and the two teams that do it best were able to smoke them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you looked at some of those teams when they weren't able to get some big time production offensively. I mean, they got run off the floor against Florida. That one was a rough one. Um, they were in tough shape when they couldn't score the ball in bunches.
So when we get to the high points of their year, Mike, I think their huge win over Vanderbilt in January was a pretty good high point, 93-68 victory there. Um, Definitely over Vanderbilt again, winning the SEC tournament. I think that was really cool. They certainly had their highs. Um, you go 28-9. I would have said, yeah. I mean, at the beginning of the year, that makes a lot of sense. They're good. They're not great. But I think that the number one high point of this year, and I know they played High Point, so not quite the best phrase there. But Darius Acuff was one of the best players that I think John Calipari has ever coached. And when Sean Miller said that in the post game, whenever they played Texas, which was March 4th, I think people were starting to come around to the fact. But still, when Sean Miller said that, people are like, all right, like, look, I think he's just glazing his opponent a little bit too much there. But it turns out that I think there's an argument that Acuff is the best guard that Calipari has ever coached. He's a freshman. He never got sped up. He was unbelievably efficient. Obviously, this year down the road is going to be remembered as the Darius Acuff year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how many good guards John Calipari's has coached. You think about John Wall and so many of those other guys in his years at Kentucky, but Acuff certainly up there is one of the better
Yeah,
ones
I think
ever.
it's
Uh, it,
Acuff, Derrick Rose, or John Wall. One of those three are the
yeah,
best.
and you looked like, honestly, before Selection Sunday, Acuff was on a Kemba Walker-esque run through the SEC tournament, and it looked like he could be, be a candidate for just making a deep run just by putting the team on his back. Now, if they draw a 6 seed instead of a 4 seed, they have a better chance of doing that, if we're being honest. They had to run into the buzzsaw that was Arizona basketball, and they didn't stand a chance, especially when Arizona gets to play their brand of basketball. I don't think anybody ever thought that was going to be a close game, and it never was. But he had an unbelievable season, especially coming down the stretch. I mean, this guy averaged 23 and a half points a game this year. Absolutely incredible stuff. And did that while still averaging 6.5 assists a game.
Yeah,
So
he didn't turn it over much either. He was 44% from three, Mike, on 207 attempts on the season. That is incredibly high
yeah,
volume. Obviously
yeah.
he was 51% on twos, 81% from the line. And look, he's not a great defender, but I don't think he was really, you know, dogging it defensively by any means. But I think, this was a special year by him, and I think it's going to be sad that he's not playing college basketball anymore, because especially towards the end of the year, going into that Arizona game, Mike, we said, look, everything is pointing to Arizona winning this game by a lot, but Arkansas has the best player on the court. Now, ultimately, Arkansas's strategy was to back off Arizona and to make them shoot over them. Well, they just took it closer to the basket and scored. So that didn't
Yeah.
really work that well. Plenty of teams tried it. You know, Arizona was only beaten three times this year, and only in 2 weeks did they lose. But I think Darius Acuff pulled this team from probably the 7 to 9 seed range, average SEC team like a Missouri or Georgia, or um, yeah, I mean those two teams are good examples. But he pulled him up to a protected seed, and it was pretty fun watching it. But the other players deserve some credit too. Malik Thomas was obviously a 5-star freshman on his own and had a very solid year. Trayvon Brazile wraps up his college career with a pretty good year after a number of injuries and missed time. They get Malik Ewan, a sort of forgotten transfer portal ad from Florida State. He proves to be really good. Billy Richmond developed well. DJ Wagner was, slightly better than the year before, but they did the Calipari thing in the transfer portal era where they have 9 players, they lose a couple injuries, and all of a sudden they were super thin by the end of the year. Do you think that is something that Calipari is going to change here, or is he going to continue to run with a very thin roster?
I think you've got to find a way to get more guys. Look, college basketball right now, you got to have 8 to 9 guys that are playing consistent minutes in order to really have a good chance at winning basketball games coming down the stretch. You're not going to be able to do it with 7 players playing playing between 30 and 40 minutes a game. It's just not going to happen in this era of college hoops, especially when you look at how many teams are super competitive and how many, you're not going to have that much time to rest players in major conference, especially in the SEC. So they're going to need to do that. And Arkansas is going to have that capability as long as they get aggressive in the transfer portal, losing a couple guys in transfer portal, potentially losing a couple guys. We'll see what happens with Malik Thomas and Billy Richmond in the next couple weeks, if they stay or if they go, but to the draft. But um, Arkansas needs to have a solid 8 to 9 guys in order to be successful, especially with the type of brand of basketball that they play, where they want to get run and gun and get as many possessions offensively as they can. They're going to need to find a way to keep fresh legs on defense.
Yeah, and I guess it's a little bit easier in this day and age, Mike, with all the media timeouts and 2.5 minute TV timeouts. But I feel like you should probably oversell minutes early on in the year and like have 11 players in your rotation when you play your bye games, so that when a couple players get injured, you're still okay. Because they were incredibly thin, and it was the Alabama double overtime game where they had to go to some 2 players in overtime that had not played yet in the game because of foul outs. And like that is just a terrible, terrible situation to be put in as a sophomore
Yeah,
who's played 4 minutes in the last month. Hey, now you're guarding LeBaron Philon from Alabama, and look, they almost
good
won the
luck.
game, but it was a 3-on-5 at the end there. In terms
Yeah,
of next year, Mike, they are doing the Calipari thing again. 2 5 stars and a high 4 star. Jordan Smith, Jay Sean Andrews, and Abdu Toure, sort of 3 guard/wings there, so expect them to be pretty in for some of the bigs here in the transfer portal. Spoiler alert: bigs in the transfer portal are expensive this year. So Arkansas will probably not be able to be super deep again if they spend big on a center, because Malik Ewan is out of eligibility and Nick Pringle is out of eligibility. So there is somebody out there who's going to be the next center for Arkansas, um, but it's not going to be somebody
Yeah.
that we currently know. I think Thomas and Richmond are obviously interesting. I think they could go, they could stay, um, but even at the best case scenario, you have 5 players with them two and your 3 freshmen. So there are going to be some transfer portal ads for this Razorback team.
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be. And look, if either, if Richmond can find a way to come back, they're going to be in really good shape.
Yeah,
If he does, and at that point, they're going to have some of the best guard play in college basketball.
they're just going to be a bunch of
100%.
super athletic, fun wings, and if you can get like a rim protector with them, I think there's a chance that they're going to be pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Then it really all just comes down to their big.
Yeah.
And if their bigs can go out there and perform, then this is a national championship caliber team. But that's right now the deepest hole right now for them is getting quality bigs to be able to be good rim protectors and then just be athletic on defense. That's going to be a big one for the Razorbacks.
All right. So looking ahead, like long term, a little bit, the state of the program for Arkansas. I think it's in a pretty good spot. I think Calipari is still a good coach, but there is a little bit of a like this. You had Darius Acuff, one of your best guards ever, and you still couldn't get this team to the top of the sport. Is there a little bit of limitations in Calipari ball now that everybody is playing on an even playing field?
Yeah, no, there certainly is a little bit of a level playing field here. But at the end of the day, Calipari still finds a way to get some of the best talent year in and year out in college basketball. And he hasn't really changed. Yeah, I mean, he has changed the way that he's done it, but he's still going after the top recruits in the country and he's still getting them. And this is with or without NIL. He's been able to do this. So uh, Calipari, he clearly has, a recruiting pitch to these young guys that he gets players drafted in the lottery pick drafts, draft picks. So that's a huge sell for a lot of these guys who, they're not just trying to make a quick buck in college. They're trying to make a professional career out of it. And who better than John Calipari at getting these guys to the next level? I don't think there is right now.
And like John Calipari said when he was the coach of Kentucky, when they had 5 players taken in the first round, he thought it was the best day in Kentucky program history. Now that was a comment that did get a little bit of flack from Big Blue Nation, but it's clear that there is a journey that Calipari wants his players to take after they leave him. And in the age of,
Yeah,
mercenaries and, you know, 1 year guys, they might be 1 year guys for Cal, but he is still looking out for their best interests. And he does not let any opportunity pass to let people know about it. But he is, I think, sort of sticking to his guns here like Tom Izzo, and there is a diminishing old guard here, Mike. We just did the Kansas video. Bill Self is going to be the coach next year, probably not going to be for much longer. Izzo probably within the next couple years will hang it up. Calipari too. I
yeah.
mean, he's not going to be coaching forever either. So the old guard is still finding some ways here to be successful, despite not really changing their ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really been incredible what he's been able to accomplish out there, and I think this could be we could be looking at them in November as a team that could be cutting down the nets at the Final Four.
So, all right, Mike, it's time for the grading portion of this 2025-2026 grade for Arkansas. With expectations in mind, I'll go first here because you went first in our last video. I'm going to go with a B plus for Arkansas. I think they took a step from last year. They competed in a very good SEC, but ultimately, I think, but like Calipari should make a Final Four to get an A.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with an A minus on this one, Sean. And the reason I'm gonna go with an A minus is, look, this was still just year two of him building the program,
Yep.
and I know, in the age of Kurt Signetti's and the Dusty Mays, people expect immediate success, especially from a program that's got that good of a coach. Look, it's a lot easier said than done. They won an SEC championship. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
They got to the Sweet 16, also big, and had they gotten into a different region, maybe they have a better chance of getting to the Elite Eight or the Final Four. But at the end of the day, look, defensively they struggled. And if they had gotten to the Final Four, that probably on this with this roster, probably would have been an A+ season. That would have far exceeded expectations. I'm going to go with an A-, mostly because of the SEC Tournament Championship. And obviously a little disappointing that only the Sweet 16 with generational talent that they did have, but at the end of the day, still going to be a good year for the Razorbacks.
So that's going to be it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please check out our other videos if you haven't already. We're going to have them, coming out here through April and May, and maybe even into June. We're going to try and get to most of the big programs. So please check out those if you haven't already. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.